Today we're going to Wethersfield, Connecticut, right outside of Hartford. Wethersfield is a town full of rich history and beautiful old buildings. Just a drive up and down Main Street and you will see amazing, gorgeous clapboard houses built in the 1700s. I have to say it's one of my favorite places to go. Just look at the buildings. We parked outside of this bed and breakfast. Check out that beautiful Victorian. And we made our way into town to visit the WebbDeaneStevens Museum. We love this place. We go often because there are 3 historic homes, and today we're going to go visit them. We're going to start our tour in the Silas Deane house. This will be the first of 3 homes that we tour today. This is a national landmark and was completed in 1769. It was the home of Silas and Elizabeth Deane. He was a rising star in local and regional politics, and he designed this house to serve as a power base for his personal ambitions. The front door opens into a spacious hallway with a grand, well-lit staircase leading to what might have served as a musician's gallery. We'll see the violin later. The ground floor was laid out to entertain and impress, featuring the best parlor with carved Portland brownstone fireplace, a back parlor used for dining, and an oversized kitchen to prepare meals for large social gatherings. Silas Deane graduated from Yale in 1758 and was admitted to the bar in 1761. He established his law practice in Wethersfield, where he met and became the legal and business advisor to Joseph Webb's widow, Mehitabel. How do you like that name? Mehitabel. They married in 1763, and their son Jesse was born the following year. Mehitabel died in 1767, leaving Deane to raise young Jesse as well as 6 Webb children. In 1769, Silas married another rich widow, Elizabeth Evarts, from New London. She was the granddaughter of a former governor of Connecticut. Her family's stature and political connections undoubtedly helped Deane to advance his career. An attorney and representative to the Colonial Embassy in Hartford, Deane became involved in the events leading to the American Revolution. He was secretary of Connecticut's Committee of Correspondence, served as one of Connecticut's delegates to the Continental Congress in 1774, and helped plan and finance the capture of Fort Ticonderoga in May of 1775. By June of 76, he was in Paris, secretly securing French military supplies for the Patriot cause. Our nation's first diplomat, he shared lodgings with Benjamin Franklin and signed the treaties of alliance and commerce that Franklin negotiated with France, the first country to recognize the United States as an independent nation. While Deane was away from home serving the Continental cause, his wife Elizabeth continued to entertain in their handsome new residence. In 1774, John Adams visited Wethersfield and took tea with Mrs. Deane. In 1775, George Washington dined with Elizabeth at the house while en route to take command of the troops outside of Boston. Elizabeth died in 1777 while Deane was still in Paris. Deane's distinguished reputation and accomplishments as a patriot and diplomat came under scrutiny beginning in 1777. Fellow Commissioner Arthur Lee was jealous and suspicious of his colleagues. He accused Franklin of being too friendly with the French and Deane of misappropriating government funds, when in fact, both Beaumarchais and Deane spent their own money in anticipation of being reimbursed by Congress. Hoping to be the sole commissioner to France, Lee persuaded his relatives in Congress to lead an effort to recall both Deane and Franklin to Philadelphia in 1778. The charges against Franklin were dropped, but those against Deane remained without his being given the opportunity to defend himself or to justify his claims for reimbursement. He returned to France in 1780 to document his claims and save his reputation. Despondent and destitute, Deane later voiced his frustrations and anger in private letters to family and friends. Unbeknownst to Deane, his personal secretary, Edward Bancroft, was a British spy. Bancroft sent copies of these letters to the British Home Office, which had them published in a New York Tory newspaper. Written before, but published after the decisive American victory at Yorktown, Dean's letters seemed defeatist, and he was branded by the press as a traitor. Back in London, the British government awarded Bancroft a pension of £1,000 per year for his service as a spy. Bancroft wrote to Jefferson that he often visited Dean, who was moved to London in 1783, to assist him with advice, medicines, and money for his subsistence. He also helped Dean get ready to return to America in 1789, but as the ship waited out a storm in the harbor, Dean suddenly became sick and died within 4 hours. Some historians suspect that Bancroft, who may have had reason to fear that Dean would reveal his secret, added poison to Dean's medications. Dean was buried in an unmarked grave in Deal, England. His house and possessions were sold to satisfy his creditors. It was not until the late 1830s that Congress gave his descendants 1/3 of the amount it owed him. Heading now into the Isaac Stevens house right next door. And I'm going to read again from the website because there's so much information they have about these homes. The Stevens house was built by leather worker Isaac Stevens in 1789. He purchased a half an acre of land on High, now Main Street, next to Joseph Webb House 3 years earlier and began construction of his new home in 1788, completing it prior to his marriage to Sarah Wright in 1789. Although smaller than its neighbors, the Stevens house is a center hall Georgian, similar in plan to the Webb house, with handsome woodwork and paneling. On the first floor, the shutters slide closed as compared to the folding shutters on the Webb house, a common feature in commercial, not residential, structures. The Stevens family suffered unfortunate losses due to illness. Following Isaac's death in 1819, his son Henry inherited the house. He succumbed to illness about 1825, and both of his sons, Elisha and Henry Jr., died. Fortunately, Henry's widow Elizabeth married Captain Stephen Francis, a Connecticut River and coast trader. They had 5 children. 4 of them survived and inherited the Stevens house jointly. For 170 years, the Stevens children occupied this home. The period interiors on the first floor provide visitors with an intimate look at the people who lived and worked here. The rooms reflect the taste of a middle-class family in the 1820s and 30s, with many original family possessions on display. The kitchen, for example, was not designed to be staffed by slaves or servants, but by the women of the household. It also doubled as an office, with a desk to keep the accounts of the household and family leather business. The rooms are comfortable, but not overly large, and the furnishings reflect the growing availability of consumer goods as well as changing tastes and technologies following the Industrial Revolution. The interiors of the Stevens house were redecorated with period wallpapers and borders of the mid-1800s to reflect a trend toward bright colors and patterns after years of drab, plain interiors. The Isaac Stevens house is listed in the Wethersfield Historic Registry. The Joseph Webb House is a National Historic Landmark built in 1752 and served as George Washington's headquarters in May of 1781. It is where Washington met with French commander, I cannot say his name, Comte de Rochambeau, to finalize the joint military campaign that led to the victory at Yorktown, ending the American Revolution. The Webb house was later owned by famous antiquarian and businessman Wallace Nutting, who commissioned murals in the first two front parlors and the hallway. The house was built in 1752 by Joseph Webb following his marriage to Mehitabel Knott in 1749. A young and successful merchant, he hired Judah Wright to frame a stylish 3.5-story house and shop with a massive gambrel roof that provided greater upper floor storage for Joseph's trade goods. It was also probably used as the sleeping quarters for the household enslaved people. When Joseph Webb died in 1761, the property was inherited by his son Joseph Jr., who married Abigail Chester in 1774. The couple entertained lavishly, earning their home the nickname Hospitality Hall. In May 1781, they were the host and hostess when General George Washington spent 5 nights in the house, meeting in conference with Rochambeau. Due to economic difficulties, Webb was forced to sell the house in 1790. After a series of owners, the house was finally purchased by Judge Martin Wells around 1820. He modernized the south half of the house, and it remained in his family until his grandson died in 1913. In 1914, the Joseph Webb House was purchased by a group of local businessmen who sought to operate it as an athenaeum or library. When they failed to raise sufficient funds, they sold it to Wallace Nutting in 1916. After extensive renovations, including the installation of painted murals in the hallway and front parlors, he opened the house to the public on July 4, 1916, for tours and as a sales area and studio. The Joseph Webb House was one of several historically significant sites in the Wallace Nutting chain of colonial picture houses. Unfortunately, with the travel restrictions created by World War I, Nutting lost money on the venture. He sold the house to the NSCDA, Connecticut, in 1919 to be preserved as a house museum and to serve as their headquarters.